Thanks so much for that, Pierre. We'll now be moving on to our Industry Legends Capital Markets panel, sponsored by Forte Metals. While the panelists make their way up onto the stage, that's your cue, guys. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel moderator, Tara Hassan. Tara is a mining engineer and capital markets professional with over 20 years of experience spanning mine operations, project development, equity research in the precious metals sector. She holds a BSc in mining engineering from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, and is a registered professional engineer in Ontario. She launched her career in operations at Inco Limited and Placer Dome, gaining extensive experience working across both underground and open pit mining environments. Later, she spent more than a decade as a highly ranked precious metals equity analyst covering small to mid-cap explorers, developers, and producers. In her senior corporate roles, Tara served as Senior Vice President, Corporate Development of Silvercrest Metals from 2020 to 2025, where she played a leading role in its financing and eventual sale to Coeur Mining. She also holds board positions, including Director of Americas Gold and Silver Corporation and a Director of Orezone Gold Corporation. Additionally, she served as Vice Chair of the Association for Mineral Exploration from the Association for Mineral Exploration from 2018 to 2024. Let you guys take it away. Thanks. Oh, we're missing Pierre.
Okay. Well, we tracked down Pierre.
Okay.
I think he was maybe needed a drink of water after that speech. But thanks, Liz, and thanks to the Yukon Chambers of Mines and the Yukon Mining Alliance. We have a tremendous panel up here today, and before we get into sort of the more technical aspects of this conference, important is to sort of talk about the market backdrop and where is capital flowing into 2026 and how the Yukon can best position. And obviously Pierre had some thoughts around the time aspect of that, but the money bit is also a pretty critical element to that. So, for the first time in a long time, metals and mining equities are experiencing the glory moments. They're in the headlines. You can turn on to Fox News or CNN, and gold is one of the top things up there. So we're getting the much needed attention, and we're also talking about the importance of critical metals and projects at the government level, and is going as far as taking equity stakes, which is a really interesting shift in this market. We are very short on time for this panel, and we have some incredibly experienced industry personnel up here. So in lieu of going through bios, which would take probably an hour with the experience we have up here, I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough and then sort of a lightning round introduction question. And then we're just going to dive right in. So we've got Michael Gray, partner and equity analyst at Agentis Capital beside me. Beside him, we've got Ira Thomas, president and CEO of North Arrow Minerals, a geologist and mining executive with more than 30 years of experience. On her left is John Robbins, founder of Discovery Group Metals, also a geologist and a prospector with more than 35 years of experience, and Pierre Lassonde, obviously we've all had a good introduction to him through his talk. So just as a lightning round to get the audience introduced to you all, can you share a memory or experience from your time being involved in the Yukon that stands out to you or makes you feel connected to the Yukon?
Want me to start?
Yeah.
For me, it was 2022 in the summer, site visit to Snowlines Valley Project, discovery outcrop, looked at the core, and I knew this is the best thing I've seen in about 20 years. It's a major global discovery. I was writing a report on the way out of camp, on the way back to Whitehorse. I was that excited. So that was my moment.
Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm back in the Yukon. I think this is one of the most special parts of the country to explore in. And my moment, and it's tough to pick one because there were so many, but honestly, it was my involvement with Kaminak, and it was this gentleman to the left who brought me into this project. I hadn't worked in the Yukon before. I'd spent most of my career in Nunavut in the NWT. And John took me through what they discovered at Coffee, and it was, still early days, and it was a chance for me to get involved. And my first actual day on the job, I got a fax through the fax machine from one of our local First Nations saying, "You're not allowed to operate there," which was a bit of a shocker. But I got on a plane and got up here and got to meet with all of them, and suddenly we started this dialogue, and I realized that we did have the broad support Pierre was talking about, and there was a real opportunity to engage with local communities and First Nations to get this project running. And that was key, and that was a big learning moment for me and a bit amazing experience that kicked off my time in the Yukon as we worked to evaluate this project and take it forward.
I guess for me, it's a shared experience with Ira in a sense. I've been working in the Yukon off and on for 35 years, prospecting, staking, but it was in early, I think it was about 2008 when we shifted our exploration focus with Kaminak from Nunavut to the Yukon. And I think it was 2010 we made the discovery there, and it was an amazing thing, and it was fantastic to be a part of a discovery that led to finding over 5 million ounces. I guess I have two big sort of moments, if I know we're on a tight time. But the other one was I was backcountry skiing in McMillan Pass, I think around 2015, and looking around, remembering that we had all studied the Mac Pass deposits in school, and skiing some of the peaks that were within a couple of kilometers of Mac Pass, and then about 3 months later had the opportunity to buy it from Hut Bay and really see Fireweed move to where it is today, and with Mac Tongue, like it's been two really amazing experiences. And the Yukon is this absolutely special place, and seize the day. I think it's the theme of this conference.
Well, first of all, I want to thank both Ira and John for the discovery of coffee. We're the fourth owner, but we're going to make it happen, okay? We're here to make it happen. My first time in the Yukon is memorable because I almost stayed here. And the reason why is that I was hired with a team back in the 1980s to see what could be done with the Faro lead zinc deposit. And we came in the middle of February, and we had to drive from Whitehorse to Faro. And between Carmack and Faro, the car spun off the road at 11 p.m., and it was minus 18 degrees. And it was totally dark. There was no one. And we were there for an hour, and I thought that my time had come, that we were going to be staying here frozen for life. And God bless whoever it was, a truck came up, and we stood in the middle of the road, like, if he runs us over, it's as good as what we were before. The individual actually took us to Faro and rescued us, and that was my first time here in the Yukon.
Well, we're glad you made it through that to come back all this time later. We're going to kick it off first on sort of some macro trends and market outlooks, and I'll start with you, Pierre. I think you're fresh off a plane from Zurich, so you probably have some timely thoughts on this. How would you characterize investor sentiment going into 2026 in the mining sector?
I would say very bullish. Like in Zurich on Monday, they had 30% more new investors showing up at all of the presentation from a junior exploration company. And I think Tim Warman, the president of Fuerte, was there. He can attest to the fact there was a great deal of enthusiasm. It's not translating as much as in terms of money. I think we're still seeing, less money than you would think. But certainly at the larger company level, if you look at the share price of the Agnico Eagle and the Newmont, they've all doubled in the last year. So there's money coming in. And usually that's the way it works. It's like the bigger company starts first, the mid-sized company then get the money, and then the exploration company trails. I think that's what we are seeing. Right now, if you're an exploration company, mostly some of them can access public money, and we're seeing more and more so. But where the money is found is mostly from family office individuals, high net worth individuals and whatnot. That's kind of where most of the exploration money today is coming from.
That's great. And I guess maybe just playing back to your conversation about time in your previous speech, about a year ago, you were on a podcast and you said we were positioned for the best 4 years in the gold space. We're about a year into that. How have things played out versus what you thought? And I heard you say it's 3 to 5 years, so I guess we've added a year, added a year to that bull cycle maybe. But has anything surprised you sort of over the last year?
Not at all. No, nothing. I think that we're on the path that I saw. The minute I saw Mr. Trump coming in as president, I said, like, buy gold. Okay, he's gonna be God's gift to gold, and this is, as long as he's president, stay with it. Okay, that's all my advice.
That's great. And feel free to jump in if you have other thoughts as we go down here. But this is, I guess, for maybe Ira or John. We've seen this big shift in geopolitics and countries prioritizing critical minerals. We've had some speakers this morning talking about ways that the Yukon and Canada can position. What are your views in terms of the best sort of steps, concrete steps that we can take to position here in the Yukon?
Well, I think we've had one extremely positive step in the last 2 weeks. We've got a government in place with a majority government that clearly supports the industry, something we haven't had for several years. That's a key thing. Obviously, the regulatory environment needs a lot of work in the Yukon and federally as well. We have to keep pushing to streamline regulations. And, we also need the cooperation of First Nations, building those and strengthening those relationships. But, one of the things that's happened is that governments have put the onus on the companies to negotiate. And in a lot of ways, that's not really been a very fair or efficient way to do things. So many communities don't have the capacity to engage, and it's a real roadblock in a lot of the development that we see in the Yukon. So I think there's the three things, and the other thing that Yukon desperately needs is electricity, and we need connection to the grid. We need the commitment from the federal government, the BC provincial government, and the territory to embrace that.
I think that was very well said. I don't have a lot to add other than, this really speaks to what Pierre was talking about earlier on time value of money. And in order to get the most out of this cycle, we really need these things to be resolved as quickly as possible, and we need everybody pulling on the same rope.
Maybe for you, Michael, we've seen obviously gold in the headlines a lot, but do you believe we're in a cyclical bull market for other metals, or is that to come still?
Well, certainly silver and copper, for sure.
Yes, okay. Are we seeing any parallels here to past bull market setups, or are there differences? I guess you've all experienced one or two bull markets in your career, so you can jump in as you want here.
Well, I think maybe just to emphasize the point you made, we've got this massive tailwind with government supporting our sector, and as Pierre highlighted in his speech, this is magical to have that embracement based on the critical minerals need for the electricity and power. So we haven't had that, and we have to seize the day. Just to echo your comments.
I think maybe I would jump in on this one. I think one thing that is different from previous bull cycles, as while we're seeing huge momentum at the mid-tier and the seniors, it really hasn't yet trickled down to the juniors, and I think there's some fundamental differences in how these smaller explorers and prospectors kind of access capital than they've been able to in the past, and that definitely has been more challenging. And it also speaks to some of the improvements that could be made at a regulatory level to facilitate and foster early stage exploration, because we need those feeder projects in order to support and sustain this full cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, Ira, and I think, Michael, you would maybe be good to elaborate on sort of what you've seen in terms of the shift of the investor makeup over time. Obviously, there's a big change in the institutional setup from sort of 10 to 15 years ago, and how you think companies can sort of best access new that the new investor makeup?
Well, Yukon has raised $391 million year to date, based on our numbers, and Alex Govins, out there in the crowd, there he is. He's raised just under, or he's put in 50 million, so it's just under 15%. So I think you want to find those special investors down the food chain, early stage exploration. You want to sponsor, I think, to access capital, strategic investments by the seniors or intermediates. You want to be supported in this market and get that kind of alternative capital that is also emerging. We're seeing, I know John is going to chime in here probably on some cryptocurrency related comments, but I think our sector is viewed as, with the GDXJ going up plus 120%, that the index, the fund managers are doing much better, the resource fund managers. The generalists have just started to come in, probably in August, with those flows coming in of capital from the generalists who've been reticent to buy gold equities because in 2016, when they came into the market, gold price went down 10%, the equities went down 30%. There was that type of asymmetric leverage. So we're seeing it's good to see this alternative capital come in, and maybe I just want to, John and I talked about this last night. I think that anecdote is really worthwhile.
Well, I think, definitely the marketplace is shifting. The retail investor that we used to rely on, in the last 10, 20 years has shifted. There's fewer of some of the traditional retail investors. It is difficult for the real early stage explorers, like the capital still is not there. I think it is going to come because it's always part of the trend. They're the last companies to see the influx of money, but we're seeing some really unusual things happening in our market. Of course, we're seeing, a more active family office environment, and to your point, like, Alex's investments up here is a good example. But having just gone through a situation where I woke up one day and a crypto company had taken over essentially our royalty company, and it has two arms. One is a US dollar-backed crypto coin, and the other one's a gold-backed coin. But our industry is very small in a global sense. Like we live in our own bubble, and we think we're really significant, and we are in terms of what we contribute for metals, and the world is beginning to realize that. But in the business sense, we're still very insignificant, and this company Tether, which essentially took over our royalty company, they're buying 200 tons of gold a week. They're the fourth largest holder of US treasuries. They have more money than God. And I think they're going to be an example of like kind of a quantum shift in our industry. And for them, it's specifically gold related. But we always have to be on the quest to be finding where these pools of capital are. But as Pierre mentioned, these events they're not going to last forever. And Yukon, this is the perfect storm. I've never seen it where we have the right government, we've got a raging gold market, the cards are all set for strong base metals. We have a federal government that appears to be doing all the right things, and a public that is finally waking up to the fact that we need these metals. So it's a different landscape, and we have to be quick on our feet to adapt to that.
That's great. I guess one of the other big themes this year is we've seen a very recent run, actually, of M&A in Canada. Maybe I'll start with you, Michael, and others can chime in here. In terms of commonalities, what do you think there are, if any, and how do you think Yukon companies can stand to benefit? Or, to John's point about looking for alternative sources of capital, are there opportunities for exploration companies to create interesting transactions that help fund them early on if that capital isn't there in the market?
Okay, yeah. We did an M&A report in June this year, and the big takeaway is all about Canada. Safe jurisdictions are where the senior mining companies and the intermediate mining companies want to build mines, despite the delay in permitting. That's based in the track record of Canadian Malartic, Cisco being bought, then Detour. What the theme is open pits, and it's scale of production. So that has been a nationwide theme. It's resonated well. A number of mines have been built in the last 5 to 6 years, and I think that's the opportunity for the Yukon. I think it's the open pit mines related to the coffees, the snow lines, the eagles, and I think part of that is going to be with the First Nation component, an ownership or a partnership, and you're going to see with Selkirk, with Minto, then with the Chunchakwichen, with coffee, if there starts to be that domino effect of First Nations also embracing it, as they have throughout Canada, I think that's going to be really important. So I would say it's open pits with scale, and Canada's a huge focus for M&A.
All right, we're good. We'll move on from that. Thanks, Michael. When we think about, I guess to John's comment on the tether, I think that kind of came out of nowhere, and seeing sort of the scale, it does put it in perspective, all this hard work that we're doing to advance the projects, and there's a company on the other end with a market cap that can sort of be the sum of many companies together just doing the end product. How do you think messaging to investors should be thought about, the shift in demographics as well, in terms of who will be the new investor as we look forward in time? How do you think that companies should be thinking about changing their strategy there, if at all?
If I may, I think that the mining industry has completely missed the Gen Z generation. The Gen Zs are in crypto by and large, and we have not tailored our message at all to that generation. And it's upon us to do a much better job. The one thing that I forgot to mention is that during my speech is that after the 1980s and the gold bull market that terminated in 1981, January 1981, but what it did do, it did set up the following 10 years for some of the most incredible discoveries ever made in Canada. And of course, that includes Hemlo in the early 1980s, 25 million ounces of gold, plus it's still going today, 40 years later. It included the diamond discovery in the Arctic, and we have two of the founders of Diavik and Ekati here with us. And including Voisey Bay. I mean, you talk about a 10-year of incredible discoveries. And I do believe that over the next 10 years, you're going to see the same thing happening here in Canada, and particularly in the Yukon, if access to the land is granted and if the infrastructure is built. I think that under these conditions, the Yukon could turn out to be, again, an incredible winner.
Anyone else want to add anything else there?
Well, I think your point about Yukon potentially having the highest per capita GDP in the country is a point that we need to drive home here, because without local support, our projects will not go anywhere. And I follow social media, much to my kids' chagrin, but I follow what's going on in the Yukon, and I constantly see things like, well, we don't need a gold mine here. We don't need a copper mine. Because let's face it, probably 50% of the people in Yukon are civil servants. I'm not knocking the civil service, but the reality is that everybody's future is tied to the economic value that's generated in this country. And Yukoners have a unique opportunity here, and I think people are starting to realize that, yeah, I actually need copper. If I want to drive my Tesla, it's got X number more pounds of copper. Even my wife, who drives a Tesla, who's a serious environmentalist, is starting to realize that we actually need mines. Yukon needs to realize that we need to build these mines. It's in the best interest of the country, and it's going to make all Yukoners, everybody, far better off financially. We'll have better parks, you'll have better infrastructure, better roads. And hopefully it'll drive electrification here and they can turn off the diesel generators, which everybody doesn't want. So.
And I just want to add to that one thing we haven't talked about, which is really, Canada's pedigree on the world stage. I mean, we know how to build mines. We know how to do things with proper environmental stewardship, and we should be really proud of that as Canadians. We lead in all of these areas. You can build projects and manage them and manage and mitigate on impacts, and we do have a strong track record for doing that. I think a lot of Canadian companies has found it's been easier in some cases to go abroad, but the reality is we've got the best geology right in our backyard, and we should be bringing all of that expertise home, and we should be deploying it at pace again, right here in Canada. And I agree that Yukon has one of the best opportunities of the bunch.
Maybe there's an opportunity to frame the gold sector, and I think Pierre alluded to it, as also critical. It's part of our security as a nation for jobs and employment as we deal with some things down with our southern neighbor. That's resonating, I think, with the youth on some level. It could resonate a lot more.
Yeah, that's great. And you touched, I think, both yourself, John, and Ira on sort of some of the opportunities that the Yukon has. But could you maybe speak to some of the challenges that explorers have in the Yukon and how to navigate those outside of sort of just the permitting and the sort of high-level ones that we've touched on? Are there other things that you think explorers should be focused on at the moment?
Well, we're blessed with fantastic geology. That's the one thing that we don't have to worry about. We have great geology, but it's access to land. We've got staking freezes in a number of parts of the territory where we don't have access to the land. We need access to the land. We need a permitting regime that allows us to explore and not wait for like 2 years to put a bridge across a creek that's no wider than from here to the end of the podium here. We need access to land. We don't control here the access to capital markets, but exploration dollars are the most portable dollars in the mining cycle. And I gave a talk at NWT Geoscience a few years ago, and I made that point because at the time the regulatory environment in the NWT was becoming unworkable. And when you're in a development stage or you're operating a mine, you don't have a choice. You're here. You can't leave. But if I'm going to spend my exploration dollars, I look at what parts of the world I want to explore. And oddly enough, we're spending more money in Europe right now in our group than anywhere else because there's been a quantum shift in the attitude towards critical metals. We're still very committed to the Yukon, but there's other parts of Canada that are far more problematic. And from those early stage dollars, we just move them where we see the best opportunities. And we've seen it happen in the Yukon. Like, in a way, it's been a bit of for me, a bit of like Groundhog Day, where we have these cycles where everybody's excited about things and somebody makes a discovery, and then 3 years later, we're spending $40 million or $20 million of exploration because the capital's left. Wrong government comes in, whatever. And I was traveling. I was actually doing a motorcycle trip up to Tuktoyaktuk when the incident at Eagle happened. And I won't go into my views on it, but everybody was calling for a shutdown of exploration, no more mines in the Yukon. And we can't have those sort of attitudes. We do have the best systems in Canada. Our technical people are the best in the world, and we need to be proud of it and not embarrassed about what we do.
I'd just maybe add a little bit about, the way mineral exploration has evolved over the last 30 years. When I started my career, a lot of the earliest investments actually came from individual prospectors that would be out on the ground in the north looking for mineral deposits that they would then bring to a junior who then could potentially go out and access capital to take it to the next level. And I think we're in a situation today where it's really difficult for those individual prospectors, those early stage explorers that live here and are working in the Yukon, to be able to access land, to go out and do that work. We've got great geology, but it's well underexplored. And you know, to acquire and find a mineral showing and then have to go through a staking process and wait a year to be able to access the ground and do your engagement. There's not a lot of resources at the earliest stage of exploration, and yet that's important. That again is the feeder zone. So I think finding a way, you know, with all our kind of regulators and sponsors in the room to ensure that those early stage opportunities are actually still possible is important. I think we've got to do a better job of that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting as you, as we go back to that M&A question, you know, it's clear that there has been sort of a dearth of exploration success, like to Pierre's earlier comment, and there's a sort of a gap in there, and as you talked about the talent pool sort of shifting to other places and money shifting, how do you think, in your experience, both here in the Yukon and elsewhere in Canada, what do you think are sort of the critical key ingredients to have a successful team that can like weather the rough parts of that cycle of exploration?
It's a great question because I think you've got a lot of junior companies, and I'm sure there's many in this room that have been struggling over the last several years just to stay alive. And so they've got share structures that are less than ideal. They've had to raise capital at very low prices. That's impacted their ability to own shares in those companies. And, you know, they are trying to progress, having come out of a very difficult period. So I think M&A for many of those companies is a non-starter. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to be an interesting chapter where we see larger companies and mid-tier companies, and I know we do have some larger companies here, and I know B2 is here, are going to be looking for creative ways to partner with these juniors who don't want a premium takeover at 40% because they don't have a market capitalization that reflects their underlying value. So they'll be looking for things like strategic joint ventures or strategic investments, anything that can kind of, you know, limit dilution and allow them to continue to progress their projects till they get to the point where the broader market will take interest. And I know, Michael, we've talked about this before as well. I think it makes me very optimistic because even though we've had, you know, tremendous runs with a number of these mid-tier and senior companies, a lot of these juniors haven't run yet, and this is a reminder that we're in the earliest innings of this bull market. There's still a lot of opportunity and potential, particularly for those explorers that have weathered the storm and are ready to, you know, engage in the next chapter.
And if you can, you know, drill a Torquay drill hole like Prospector did, oh my word, you're up, you know, tenfold. So the market is really ripe for discovery drill holes.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I guess that plays into the next, which is how it's not just winning the investor, which is step one, but it's also keeping the investor and not having them, you know, blow out your stock on a disappointing result the next time. So, you know, as you think about that duration of time, which is one of the toughest things and the biggest opportunities in mining, how do you sort of appeal to those investors that might be impatient after a long time of not being rewarded in the market?
Well, I would say you want that sponsor. If you haven't had that discovery to really launch the company, you want that sponsor, whether it be a special investor or a strategic investor, as Iris pointed out, B2Gold or someone like that, to help give confidence to the market that you're going to be able to fund every year. You've got support. And so you can do that patient science that you need to do to make a discovery if that's the way, you know, the market does want you to get gold in a box. I've been there, you know, co-founded a junior, and you are under a lot of pressure to deliver that shiny object. But when you can get a team put together, like John and I talked about this last night, the coffee team was a hunting pack, and they really, they collaborated and found an ore body, and the market just understood and was patient, I think, around Catalyst, that this was a great team. And I think that's partly why Rob Carpenter has had success on the back of a sponsorship, and then his track records came into play. And we don't cover the company, full disclosure, but that's kind of an example of how you can leverage success, I think, between a sponsorship and then having a track record.
Well, I think you need to have credible technical people, for sure. But if you're wanting to keep investors engaged, there's got to be a huge level of transparency and honesty. Because the last thing people want is radio silence. Because people always treat, silence as bad news. And sometimes it's not great news, but I think it's something that we've always done, is we've always been very transparent. And shareholders respect that. And as long as you're still ultimately delivering, when you go through a bit of a rocky patch, they'll stick with you. But if you do what some people do, and it's human nature, I guess, is to clam up when things aren't going right, or you just got delays in assays, it can be taken the wrong way. And shareholders, I mean, that's their prerogative, right? They try to stick with winners, and if you have the appearance of not being a winner, they're gone.
Yeah, and it is an interesting challenge, being in the Yukon with fixed field seasons. There are points of time where you naturally have to be, you end up with maybe not that same level of news flow. How do you balance your teams, especially in a market which feels like, maybe to your point, Ira, maybe the juniors haven't run, but there's a bit more euphoria and excitement from, not getting sort of greedy about, oh, now we have money and we can just go out and do everything we want to do, and keeping them disciplined on the longer term strategy so that you can deliver the news flow and follow the path that you've been out talking to investors about.
Yeah, listen, it's critical. I mean, as John pointed out, having a strong technical team is paramount, but also in early stage exploration, you've got to know when to move on, right? You've answered the question, you need to move on. And I think that's super important when you've got limited time and limited money. I think Yukon has a big advantage just in terms of its road infrastructure compared to other territories in the north. And that these projects are more accessible. I wouldn't say year-round, obviously. There are less optimal months to be up here doing work, but it does have an advantage with the infrastructure it has, and with the announcements of further investments. I think that's going to be a real game changer for a lot of the early stage explorers as well.
That's great. I guess staying on that topic of sort of how the market rewards exploration success, Michael, if you look back on your career, and I've been lucky enough to be on site visits with you for all over the world, how do you think the bar has shifted in terms of what people need to deliver from exploration success to actually translate into market value?
Well, there's so many juniors, it's very competitive. I think the bar in this particular market has been lowered in terms of what you have to deliver, in terms of, I like to call them torquey drill results, 100 meters times 1 gram, 100 gram meter intercept. You're going to be on the radar screen. Something high grade in a new discovery is going to attract a lot of attention. And so the bar, I think in some ways has been lowered, but it's mainly for new projects. The older projects that have been around for a while, those are the ones that I think are going to really catch a bid. To Ira's point, in terms of investors coming down the food chain into the juniors, the new shiny objects that have a drill hole discovery, those will go right away. But the resource plays that have well-established high grade, they haven't really moved. There's a lot of these projects that are kind of been abandoned by the market, and they'll show up soon.
At Spotty, I think one thing that's different in this market is that we don't have enough Michael Grays. We don't have enough analysts. We don't have enough people actually covering these early stage stories that have technical expertise. That's a big difference as well. So I think for the average investor to be able to do the work to understand the technical merits, it's not easy to differentiate 100 stories that all have a market cap of 20 million.
One thing I noticed when, I think Pierre, you asked the question of who was around in the 70s to 80s, a shockingly low amount of hands went up for a mining conference. Usually it would be probably 80% of the room. So it appears like, and just looking at some of the big discoveries that have come out of the Yukon, it's come from groups with pretty young teams, and sometimes that's hard to go into an institutional investor because they want this storied history of 50 years of experience and being out in the field for all this time. Can you maybe speak to, how to win that investor confidence and convince people early on that that there is that talent, and it doesn't need years of experience, it just needs sort of the education and the environment that's been created here in the Yukon?
Well, I think that the winning teams are a combination of all of the above. I mean, you will have like some gray hair that have seen it all, done it all over, and are able to help. But you also need like the younger generation that is hungry, that is bringing new eyes to projects. So to me, the winning teams are always like a combination of people. And at the end of the day, it's all about people. Good people make good things happen. And so and I've been very fortunate. I mean, if anybody asks me, like, what's the secret of my success? Surrounding myself with better people than myself. And because they make you look good, okay? And it's been one of my core tenet is always have great people.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I think the human capital is going to be really stressed in the next little while, especially with companies able to raise so much money. And that's not only on the exploration front, but on the mine development front. So I think that's going to be a key thing for the Yukon.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
We have such a massive shortfall in talent. When our market really gets going and we start building mines up here or anywhere else in the world, like I've got 3 kids, in the 28 to 30 range. One thankfully went into the mining sphere, but like it just hasn't been an attractive, like reality is for the last 30 years you go to a cocktail party, you don't really want to say you're a miner. And everybody wants to, work for the next NVIDIA or whatever. But I said to, my son, there's never been a better time ever to pursue this industry because the world is, for a young person, the world is their oyster in the resource sector.
And we are seeing it because this year entrance class, the U of T and the mineral engineering, 90 kids, and it's the highest ever in the 100 years that they've done mining. So the young are responding to this critical metal, rare earth, and the necessity for Canada to be playing the role that it should be playing.
I was back at Queen's for my 20-year homecoming, and I was told it was, again, a big incoming class for the mining year, but then I was told that they threw a kegger after the information night, so I think that influenced some people to get into mining, but that means they're starting off good and will understand sort of the groundwork that you need to be able to have a long life in this business. We've got just a few minutes here. I guess, we talked about what the Yukon can do and what's going to be important to attract investment. But I guess, Michael, in your conversations with investors, is there a specific elements that you think are holding back, or like a sign or milestone that would attract even more capital to the Yukon?
Well, if the Grid Connect happened, that would be phenomenal. So, and I would argue in 2022 here, Andrew Karn gave a speech to kind of propose that idea, and it's gone a long ways. There's $40 million being spent on a pre-feasibility study. So I would say it's the infrastructure piece.
Any other thoughts from Don?
I would just remind everybody that, from discovery to development in Canada today is averaging 15 to 20 years, and we need to bring that down. Infrastructure could be a huge help, but it's also going to be about the efforts that are being made on the regulatory front to try and streamline and make these projects happen quicker.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I was having this conversation about that time in mining, and it's hard when you're going through various stages of government and new governments every 4 years, to be able to have that consistency of messaging to keep investors confident over that longer duration. And I don't know what the fix is for that, but it certainly sounds like the direction we're going at the federal level to commit to larger scale infrastructure projects is a good sign.
Back to Pierre's point about the time value of money on projects for companies, it's also the cash flows for governments and First Nations. They're losing out by not bringing forward some of these tax cash flows. So that's a really important thing, I think, to educate the government and First Nations on opportunities.
That's great. As we wrap up here, I might just go down the line and, you can each answer this in your own way. I think even myself as someone in the market, I feel like I've missed the market a bit because I've been off on a little bit of a mini sabbatical this year. What would you tell the audience if you feel like they've missed the market, and how should they position going into 2026? Yeah, I'll just go down.
I'd say listen to Pierre.
I would say listen to Pierre as well. It's just beginning.
And I say bye.
It's a very efficient answer. I don't know, John, if you have anything more you want to add to that, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you always have a tendency to think that maybe you've missed the boat. And just an analogy, when we made the Great Bear discovery in Ontario, and our stock went from 20 cents to $2.50, everybody was like, we missed it, we missed it. Mm-hmm. It's the stock's run, and I feel like we're at that $2 stage right now in our market here. Mm-hmm. Like, there's still tons of runway. There's still a 10x in front of us.
Yeah,
If a company is well run, okay, like you take Orla, we started that company 10 years ago. I have invested, like at 50 cents, at $1.50, at $2.50, at $3.50, at $7. We just did a placement to buy the Musselwhite mine, and it was at $7.50 with like, $12, $11 warrants or whatever. I bought some of that too. And now the stock is $17. Okay, like, have I missed anything? No, because I've invested, like, I keep investing. And guess what? It's going to go higher. I can tell you that. Okay, because we have, like, the asset to grow this company. So when you look at where the market is today, particularly companies that are around the Yukon, I mean, to my mind, like, a lot of them are real buys. So you haven't missed, because the junior end of the market is still very, very low compared to the medium and the large company. It has not had the move that you would expect. It's normal. It's a cycle.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like we're going to have a run on Yukon explorers in the market tomorrow based on this panel. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's always that joke about the taxi driver test. If you get in a taxi and they're just pitching you on mining stocks, we're maybe at the top of the market, and I haven't been pitched yet by anyone in Vancouver, so we've got some time. We maybe have time for one or two questions if there's anyone in the audience that has a burning question for any of the panelists.
I mean, one thing I'd like to remind people all the time is that mining is a temporary use of land. And I was reminded of that, in an incredible fashion. When I was president of Newmont, we owned the mine in Telluride, okay? I mean, this is a ski center. And we inherited a mine, and of course, if the name Telluride is there, it's got to tell you the minerals there, okay? Like, not exactly the nicest thing in the world. And the mine operated for about 25, 30 years, and it had tailings and everything else. And we went in there, we cleaned it up, and guess what? We ended up selling lots for over $1 million, okay, because it was the Telluride ski resort. And we cleaned it up so well that we ended up making more money as a ski resort than as mine, okay? Now, I'm not going to say this is going to happen in the Yukon, but this industry has learned its lesson, and it can close mines and leave nature the way it was before, because mining is a temporary use of the land. That's what it is. But it's one that creates enormous wealth when it's done properly. For
sure. Yeah, that's a great way to end. If there are no questions, I think we're into lunchtime now. So I just thank all the panelists for their time. Obviously, they'll be around if you do feel the need to pitch them on your stock or something else here today. But I appreciate the time from everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.